Hello, dear friends. Welcome to my channel. I am Dr. Shaily, and today we are going to discuss Dalit literature and its social movement. In the previous lecture, we have already understood the concept of Dalit. We have gone through the definitions, also the question that who were the Shudras, whether they were different from Dalits or not. We also looked at caste system and Varna Vyavastha and the niche carved by Dalit writers. If you have not watched that video, please watch that so that you have a better understanding of Dalit, the term, as well as their literature. In lecture number 2, we are going to understand origin of Dalit literature, its definitions, social movement and literary movement of Dalits, form and purpose and style of Dalit literature, and what makes it different from mainstream literature, and who can write Dalit literature, which is still a debate in the literary field. We have already talked about the origin of Dalit term, and now we are going to trace the origin of Dalit literature. Dalit literature is also called the literature of subaltern or marginalized literature or the literature of the fourth world. The literature of marginalized was already being produced orally since 5 and 6 centuries in the form of oral poetry, abhangas, bhakti songs, etc. But the specific term Dalit literature was coined in 1958 in Maharashtra Dalit Sahitya Sangh, and it was first ever conference of Dalit literature. Before this, it was called by different names like Buddhist literature, marginalized literature, Harijan Sahitya, Ambedkari Sahitya, non-Brahminical Sahitya, etc. In 1972, Dalit Panthers, a social movement for the liberation of Dalits, came into existence. It was inspired by the Black Panthers movement that was happening in Africa against racism. Namdev Dasal, J.V. Pawar, Raja Dhale, these people led Dalit Panthers and also popularized the term Dalit literature. The early poets or saints who gave voice to the plight of untouchables were Madara Chennaiya, Dohara Kakaiya, Chokha Mela. These poets, they were kind of saints and they produced oral poetry, and they mainly wrote devotional songs. They tried to seek salvation by devoting themselves to God. In 20th century, we have Hira Dome and Swami Achyutanand, who also wrote great Dalit poetry. In the middle of 20th century, there was a huge upsurge of Dalit autobiographies. The first of these was Achut by Daya Pawar, and it was published in 1962 as Baluta. Then there was Akkarmashi, Against All Odds, Juthan, Outcast, a Memoir, The Prisons We Broke, and many more like that. This list is not very inclusive. I have just put some of the autobiographies in case you are interested to read one of them. The social movement of Dalits and their literary movement more or less went side by side. Literary movement most of the time was the byproduct of the social movement, and it started from the 5th century itself when there was the rise of Buddhism. Buddhism preached ahimsa, karuna, daya, compassion, and took untouchables inside the Dhamma. Buddhist Pitaks and other literature, they also preached equality and justice, and they were also against caste system. They were against all kind of discriminations, and it was the very first hope of untouchables to improve their lives. In the middle of 8th century, Siddha and Nath poets preached equality in society and criticized caste system. There were 84 Siddha poets like Sarhapa, Mahipa, Bhadrapa, etc. And they all talked about the discrimination done by the Brahmins and also the double standards that were practiced in the religion. Then there was Bhakti movement, which lasted at least more than 5 centuries. It started from 11th century and remained even after 15th century. Bhakti movement was led by Sagun and Nirguna, two sects, and it flourished in the medieval India. They found solace in singing devotional songs and propounded that God does not discriminate against people. Kabir, Nanak, Raidas, Dadu, Chokha Mela, etc. These were the poet saints who sang devotional songs and also fought for the rights of untouchables. Next was Jyotirao Govindrao Phule, who also brought social movement to India through his social work and literary outputs. He started his first school for girls and formed the Satya Shodhak Samaj. His wife, Savitribai Phule, also worked for girls' education. The important works of Jyotirao Phule were Tritiya Ratna, Brahmana Chekasab, Gulam Giri, etc. And he has also written some other 14 works as well. Along with Phule, there were Periyar and Ambedkar Satyagraha going on, and there was the arrival of British as well, as you can see in the timeline provided here under social movement. See, first there was Buddhism, then there was Bhakti movement, then the Britishers came to India, and Jyotiba Phule, Periyar in South, and Ambedkar in Maharashtra. Phule was also from Maharashtra. They also started their own satyagraha for the upliftment of the untouchables. Then there was Arya Samaj, Brahma Samaj, and Adi Dharma. These were the movements led by the upper caste people. And they also wanted to take untouchables inside their religion. But these movements were criticized on the basis that they started a Shuddhi movement and tried to take untouchables inside their religion by performing that particular ritual. So, this Shuddhi movement got so much rejection and resentment from people and especially from Dalits. And this is the reason these movements did not become very successful. Next is Dalit Buddhist movement, which is also called the mass conversion. Ambedkar, with his 500,000 followers, converted to Buddhism in 1956, and it was a huge blow to Hinduism. Many people tried to stop Ambedkar from doing this. Even Gandhiji tried to stop him, but he did not stop. He said that I was born a Hindu, but I would not die as one. In 1958, there was the first Dalit Literary Conference. Look at the timeline of literary movement. So you would see that they both go hand in hand, they both go together. And now what we have is we have a huge plethora of Dalit literature, Dalit writings, Dalit autobiographies, novels, dramas, poetry flourishing in every region of India, every state of India. Now, another important question comes: what is Dalit literature? What is its subject? What is its purpose? What is its form? And what makes it different from the literature of the mainstream? First of all, the subject of Dalit literature is to expose the shams of society, how the society follows double standards for Dalits and for upper castes, how there are different rules even today, even after the abolition of untouchability. We see that Dalits are still struggling a lot for their survival. Dalit literature presents the plight of untouchables and it provides a testimony of their past. Many of the untouchables do not know their history, they do not know where they belong, and Dalit literature gives them a sense of belonging, it gives them their identity. The purpose of Dalit literature is to record their history and to inform every Dalit of their mental slavery. It speaks against injustice, inequality, and also tries to raise awareness, which we call Dalit consciousness. Talking about the form of Dalit literature, it has come out in the form of testimonies, autobiographies, poetry, novels, and moreover and very important, it rejects traditional aesthetics. Another important debate in Dalit literature is that who can write Dalit literature and who cannot. Some argue that literature written by Dalits with a Dalit consciousness is Dalit literature. But is it true? Let us find out. Kashiram Singh, one of the mainstream writers, he said on the Dalit necessity of Dalit identity for literary production, you don't have to be a horse to write about a horse. And Om Prakash Valmiki, one of the prominent Dalit writers, replies to this. Yes, you can write about the horse, his external contours, his canter, and his neighs. But when at the end of the day, the same horse, having done his share of laboring, exhausted and hungry, stands tied to a post in the stable, what can you write about how he feels or what emotions he harbors towards his master or about his inner pain? So here, Valmiki totally seems to be on the side that literature of Dalits should be written by Dalits. Another mainstream writer, Vidyadhar Pundalik, emphasizes on the use of imagination for writing Dalit literature. And Limbale replies to him. He says, where the imaginative power of non Dalit luminaries has been hiding until now, removing and cutting dead animals, how will non Dalits write about this experience of Dalits with the power of their imagination? How will they feel the anger rising in the hearts of untouchables on their helpless imagination? Vidyadhar Pundalik himself does not want to come outside the boundary of the village, but force of his imagination does. So here is a direct comment on the segregations that are there in society. The place outside the village was always reserved by the Dalits, and nobody used to enter that place. The place would be full of murk and full of dirt and whatnot. Here is an excerpt from The Outcast Akarmashi, the autobiography of Sharan Kumar Limbali. He tells, quote, when we were young, the sight of a dead animal excited us. We would draw closer when they started skinning it. As a tough boy, I was always asked to help in small ways. Men peeled off the skin off with knives. My hands would be sticky with blood and flesh. The legs I held slipped from my grip, so I was scolded. I used to watch closely the things I had learned about in school: liver, intestines, lungs, heart, spleen, everything. Dogs would hover in the fringes of the gathering, and a boy was appointed to throw stones at them to drive them away. Here we see the experience of Limbali as a small boy and how beautifully and realistically he presents it. Such expression was never found in any of the works produced by the mainstream writers. Coming back to the question, who can write Dalit literature? On one hand, the mainstream writers say that they can use their imagination to write Dalit literature. And on the other hand, Dalit writers also come with serious objections. They say that the mainstream writers have a limited insight because they lack first hand experience, because they have not seen Dalit life closely, and that is why their perception is very different. They cannot feel what an exploited person feels like. They also say that the mainstream writer's perspective is biased and they are unaware of the history. Also, because they remain aloof from Dalit society, they cannot present it realistically. It would only be superficial and only would be based on their imagination. But there can be some tenets which we can form to answer this question. A person who writes with Dalit consciousness can write Dalit literature. A person who presents social realism, which means he presents society in a realistic way, can write Dalit literature. If someone has closely observed Dalit society and understands Phule and Ambedkar's ideology and also has an unbiased humanitarian attitude, then that person can definitely write Dalit literature. These are the basic tenets which are often provided by Dalit writers. I hope you understood today's lecture. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.